here today and for giving up your time to join us. So if we can start, if we go around the room and everyone can introduce themselves and tell us a bit about who you are, that would be really good.
Hello, so I'm Angela Stratton. I'm a rural generalist in Mount Beauty, Victoria, and I'm also the statewide clinical lead for the Victorian Rural Generalist Program.
I'm Ian Wilson. I'm working at Wangaratta in emergency now, so I'm a rural generalist. I did obstetrics and anaesthetics and emergency, of course, and then switched to emergency medicine, being the emergency medicine director at Wangaratta, and I'm the emergency clinical lead for the Victorian Rural Generalist Program.
I'm Mimi Ziliakis and I am the implementation coordinator for the Victorian Rural Generalist Program. And basically what that means is I'm setting up some of the processes and projects around the establishment of the program.
My name's Dan Wilson. I'm a rural generalist in training, working in the Grampians region, currently working at East Grampians Health Service in Ararat.
A rural generalist in training as well, and I'm working in Castlemaine Health / one of the clinics in Castlemaine.
Currently in my first term in general practice, having done an advanced skill in obstetrics last year. I have been enjoying a combination of GP and ongoing obstetrics work, and I'm still involved in the Bendigo Hospital to keep my skills up, and I go across to a couple of other little towns, including Maryborough, where I'm also providing obstetrics services.
Thank you all for introducing yourself. So our first question is for Angela or Ian. The first question is, what does a rural generalist do, and what's a typical day in the life of a rural generalist?
I'm actually just suddenly being called in. Graham Slaney was meant to be doing this. So Graham did an emergency Caesar this morning, did his clinic, ward round, and then he was coming in to do this interview, and of course another lady's pushing, so she's about to deliver. So I'm actually being called in from emergency to actually do the interview tonight. So it's quite varied. My practice now is mainly emergency. I still do drug and alcohol work, and I still do anaesthetics. I no longer deliver babies, except for emergency ones, which come in through the door. But it's a good life. I've loved it. It's a great career. I love working with young people. I love working with the patients. It really gives you a sense of serving your community, and that is really enjoyable. I'm involved in the local community, and so it's a program that you're really helping you develop the skills you need to serve your local community in terms of medical skills, and you become a leader in the whole community. So I'm telling you the good things about it, but it's really the medical skills you need to work in a local community, whatever those skills might be.
Ian has highlighted that the skills of a rural generalist are as diverse as the communities in which they serve. So the idea of a rural generalist is a specialist general practitioner that has a broad enough set of skills that they can do whatever's required for the community in which they live. And I think Ian has given a great example there of rural generalists who might need anaesthetic and obstetric skills and leadership skills, but it might be mental health or palliative care, because all rural generalists have an advanced skill set. That's part of the technical definition, I suppose. But the idea is that they're truly part of their community, and they do whatever it takes or get whatever skills they need to actually serve that community. And as Ian said, it's incredibly rewarding.
Thanks, Angela. So our next question then is for Louise or Dan or Sarah. So whoever wants to answer this one. How did you, or maybe all three, if that's better, how did you discover that rural journalism was something that you wanted to do?
I'll take that one first, I think. Thanks, Caitlin. So I was lucky enough to be part of the extended rural cohort in medical school and was able to spend a year training and learning in Echuca, where there are an abundance of very talented both GP anaesthetists, GP obstetricians, and GPs with special interest in paediatrics. During that time, I really got the bug, I guess, where it was amazing to be able to go from the clinic and then to the hospital to deliver a baby and then back to the clinic, and the patients didn't mind that they were waiting for 3 hours because they knew that when they were in the room with you, they were the most important person there, and that you weren't going to give them substandard care, and they understood that if they were in an emergency situation, that they would know that you would be there. And the variety was just amazing. And I met some wonderful mentors there who kind of pointed me in that direction. And yeah, so from third year medical school, I was like, yep, I think I want to be a GP obstetrician. I think that would be awesome. And then throughout my junior doctor training in the hospital, I was further able to develop those skills. And here I am, and it's awesome.
Thanks, Louise. Did anyone else want to share their journey at all?
I suppose mine is slightly different. So I wasn't as lucky as Louise. I didn't do like a rural rotation when I was a student. However, I found that when I was an intern, I had great passion for emergency medicine. But I knew from medical school that I enjoyed general practice because I enjoyed the continuity of care and preventative medicine. So I looked into a few options, including ACRM, and RACGP provided the option of VRGP, and now it's called Rural Generalist. So I decided to pursue that. And I think that was a great option because last year I did a whole year of emergency medicine in Bendigo. And now working at Castlemaine, I'm able to work in the clinic, and I'm also able to participate on the on-call roster, and also still able to do a couple of shifts a month up in Bendigo emergency just to maintain my skills. So I think overall it's a great variety of, acute care and also sort of chronic disease and preventative medicine.
Thanks, Sarah. So Dan, we might give you the next question, which is, what has your training journey been so far?
Thanks, Caitlin. A rural generalist in training, their journey can be really diverse and different from each other. So myself, Lou and Sarah have probably had all really different journeys, but there is a overarching structure to that training. So after medical school, the first year is a supervised year as a medical intern that takes place in a state health service. And then from second year, you then complete an additional hospital-based year. And then beyond that, the world can be your oyster as to which order you do things, but most people might elect to do an advanced specialist training year. So for me, that's coming up. I've added a little bit of additional training time in my journey. So that flexibility to choose between whether you do your advanced training year in obstetrics, anaesthetics, paediatrics, palliative care, whatever it be, you could do that as year 3, year 4 or year 5. And if you've chosen to do it in year 3, then in years 4 and 5, those years will be taken up by time in the community where you'll be practicing in a general practice. So for me, my journey has been almost now 2.5 years in a hospital because I've had the flexibility to add some additional small rural hospital training time. And I've got another about 2 years and a bit beyond me.
Thanks, Dan. So the next question for you guys as well is, what are some of the benefits of training in a rural or regional area? And the question after this is, are there any downsides as well?
For me, I guess the benefits of training in a regional centre to do your hospital times and internship and then your year 2 and then advanced skill is great, that you got the community feel, but you're still in a big enough centre that you get a high through of cases, and you get a really good experience to then be able to take into a smaller community following that. And by being in a large hospital such as Bendigo Health, which is where I was doing my obstetrics training, it meant that I was able to develop referral pathways now that I'm in general practice. So I know all of the obstetricians that I might want to call if I have a question. I've got those networks. I know surgeons that I've got their mobile number, and I'll just pick up the phone and give them a call if I've got a question about a patient. So it's small enough that you can develop those relationships so that you can then refer these people later on, but it's big enough that you get a good amount of skill and a good variety and a good volume so you can develop whatever your skill might want to be. So for me, that has been obstetrics, and I've delivered many, many babies and become quite confident in doing Caesars just in a year. And by doing ongoing training one day a fortnight, I get to maintain those skills for me. since I did my advanced skill year before my community time, it does mean that now I can use those skills in practice, I suppose. So I am really privileged to be able to go out one Tuesday morning a fortnight to Maryborough, and I run an antenatal clinic with another GPO colleague. We participate in the on-call obstetrics roster. So if women go into labour, we get a call and off we go, and that's fabulous. And then, of course, I get all the benefits of general practice. So you get that cradle-to-grave medicine that you can't get in any other specialty. I am extra lucky because I can deliver the baby and then see the baby and the mum again for the 6-week check, and then go through. And then when that woman is ready, if it was a baby girl and they want to have a baby, then awesome. Then I can provide that antenatal care, and the cycle keeps going through. At the moment, I'm seeing a huge variety of, obviously women's health is my area of interest, so I'm seeing heaps of that, but I'm also doing some palliative care. So I go out and I do home visits. I've got a couple of palliative patients now, and I've got a number of new cancer diagnoses that I'm been managing through, along with your normal chronic disease management. So for me, the best thing about rural generalism is the variety. In the morning, I could be going and delivering a baby. I can then be going to the urgent care centre to see a person with chest pain, and then I can come back and cut out a skin lesion or sit down and do a mental health care plan with someone. I think it's fabulous.
Dan or Sarah, do you have anything to add or any downsides that you can think of?
The downside, I suppose, is limited access to specialist care, but I look at it as a downside, but also a plus point. So, for example, to see a pediatrician, it might be a 6-month wait, but I think that trains rural generalists or rural GPs to be able to have the skill set to work up the patient. And by the time they see a specialist, they would have the investigations or basic management that's required. And I think that's a great skill set to have. But that definitely is one of the limitations working in a rural centre.
I might throw in what I think is the greatest thing about being a rural generalist in training. For me, it's becoming an integral and core valued member of the community in which I work. You really are so privileged to work as a GP with advanced skills in a small town. Just about everyone recognises you and knows you, and you come to know everyone in the community that you take care of and their extended families and networks. The only downside is that for me, that there can be a fair bit of work sometimes outside of traditional working hours as a rural generalist in training. So you do some on-call work. And the other downside upside is that everyone knows you.
That's one of the good things, but also a bad thing, I guess, of rural areas. I completely understand that. The next question is, do you think there's any benefit of doing a metro internship or a few metro years before going into the rural generalist training program?
Everybody's training journey is going to be different. So you've got to do what's right for you. If you want to be closer to family in a metropolitan centre, and you think that that's where you're going to be the happiest and you're going to get a good skill set, then work in a metro hospital. Do what you need to do. The rural journey doesn't have to start from day dot. I mean, if you do start it from day dot, then that's fabulous, and you're going to have an awesome experience, and you're going to learn some great skills early on and get those networks and that community involvement happening. But everybody's different, and everyone's situation is different. So if for you, you really want to work at the Alfred as an intern, or you really want to work at Royal North Shore, or whatever it is for you, then do what you need to do. I don't think that there is a right or wrong answer, but as long as you've got a commitment to rural health, you'll get there in the end. So take your journey how you need to take it, and you won't get a different or a poorer experience from doing a metropolitan internship rather than a regional. So I would say that if you did work in a smaller centre, you are more likely to be known face to face. You'll know who you can refer to, and you might get a bit more access to hands-on stuff than you would in the city. But you've got to be where you want to be for your family, your friends, and your life.
So I agree with Louise in that you won't be missing out on rural generalism skills by doing it in the metro. And we know that family and connection to where you are is incredibly important in those very stressful early junior doctor years. I'm also a big believer that the best people to train rural generalists are other rural generalists, and part of your training is that mentorship, being around other rural generalists. And because we have such a diverse scope of practice, being around people who actually see it through the eyes of a rural generalist and what it's like working in a rural and remote community is a skill that is best learned in the country. So if you're considering whether metro is actually something that might help you towards rural generalism and that's why you're there, I would actually bunk that myth, so to speak, and the best place to be if you're interested in rural in terms of skill set is actually being out in the country amongst rural generalists.
Absolutely agree, Angela. I think Louise's point of ensuring that you're happy as an intern is the most fundamental thing. So practice where you're going to be pleased with yourself and have a really good support network. But I completely agree that if you already know that rural's for you, jump on the bandwagon now, because you're going to have the best rural generalist in training experience in those rural communities. And I would just add that the flexibility of the Victorian Rural Generalist pathway means that there is lateral entry. So if you're not ready to go to a rural centre to start your training, you can enter at a later point in your career if you so think that that's right for you.
Thanks, Dan. This question's for Mimi or Ian, or Angela. It's what is the Victorian Rural Generalist Program?
The Victorian Rural Generalist Program is an end-to-end supported pathway for trainees who wish to become rural generalists. And the brilliant thing about the Victorian Rural Generalist Program is that prior to now, although rural generalists have been around since doctors began, some of the training has been a little bit disjointed. And the brilliant thing about this program is that we are helping people who have a passion and want to train as rural generalists, right from making contact during medical school through to that internship, popping you in to train, do your internship and your PGY 2 years in amongst rural generalists, and then supporting you to do your advanced skill, whenever that may be, whether it's straight after that initial few years or later, once you've got a connection to the community, and that you might decide then, after you've been to community, what your community needs, and therefore that might decide your advanced skill. And then another important role of this program is actually determining the workforce that we need to look after the communities in Victoria. So we're also going out there to these communities and finding out what type of doctors we need so that we can help to train the right kind of doctors that are going to do the best job for these communities.
So the program's really been developed after a long process of consultation from the Department of Health with all of the stakeholders and with doctors in training and students who have gone through the training in the past, and tried to really address all of the challenges that people have faced. And at the same time, as Angela mentioned, trying to make sure that the program is actually addressing workforce needs. So the training pathways that will be developed by the regional coordinators are really driven by the needs of the community, working in consultation with all of the small rural health services, so that you know that if you take one of these training pathways, you will not only come out of it with some great skills, but also be able to have a sustainable practice. You'll know that you're going to be able to use the skills that you develop in the community where you train.
So the next question, I guess, is how does the VRGP work for their trainees, and what support is offered for the trainees?
So to start with, it's really we're trying to start very early on. So working with students in their final year of medical school to link them with mentors in the areas, in the regions or in the discipline in which they want to practice, so that you develop those relationships very early on, and you can build on those relationships right the way throughout your training. And so we have regional coordinators in each region, and my position will be working on some of that communication and marketing, so getting out to the students and really talking to them early on. And then obviously the clinical leads who will help with some of the mentorship and really provide quality and governance for the program as well.
So I've been doing mentorship and this sort of work with medical students and junior doctors for the last 10 years. So the Murray to Mountains program is a program for people who are heading towards rural general practice. And so the way that I would do it is talk to people involved in hospital that you might be interested in training, and the people on the ground will give you advice, and we're very good at sorting out what you want to do and so giving you different options of how you do your training.
There's a strong case management approach that's being built into the whole program through the clinical leads and also the roles of the regional coordinators as well. So that combination of sort of programmatic support and also clinical support is going to give trainees some really great training and a lot of support structures along the way.
One of the exciting things about the Victorian Rural Generalist Program, and the government is really wanting to improve the health of rural communities. And if there is a community that identifies that they have a need for a particular skill and particularly things such as mental health or palliative care, and you've got an interest in that and say, hey, I want to go to that community, I really want to go and use this skill, then we can actually help you to develop that placement, get the training that you need so that you can go out there to the community. So there is, although there's a lot of talk about the procedural domains, which are incredibly important and are the lifeblood of a lot of rural communities, there's also rural generalists with a lot of other diverse skills, and we're definitely able to help ensure people have got the skills to go and work in communities in those areas too.
Thank you. That sounds really interesting and something that I'm sure a lot of people who listen to this later will be interested in. For med students and junior doctors now, I guess, how are people interested in becoming rural generalists? How can they get involved in the program, or how do they go about applying?
So we're currently in the process of developing all of those procedures and business rules for how those applications will be managed. We envisage that there will be entry into a 3-year pathway at the point of entering into internship, and then there will be other processes to laterally enter into the program in other years, including in the advanced skills training year, where we have more positions than there are intern positions, to allow for existing GPs to upskill, or for people who hadn't gone through the pathway to also take on advanced skills and become rural generalists. So we're in the process of developing all of those procedures, and we will be trying to get all of that in place in time for there to be a lot of communication around that before the intern match next year. But as I said before, it's also about working with students early on to build some of that mentorship before they actually go into training as well.
That kind of leads into this next question. So I've heard that rural generalism is being registered as a separate specialty now. What does this mean, and will the current training programs meet the requirements of the new specialty?
Rural generalism has been around for a really long time, but it's actually now in the process of being recognised as a subspecialty in its own right of general practice. So rural generalists have an extended skill set, as we said, and the Victorian Rural Generalist Program is already meeting the needs of training towards this particular qualification, and so there's no concerns about that at all. Once it comes through, it will already be set up, ready to go, and this is not just about recognition for what the rural generalists already do, but also there'll likely be some in terms of Medicare rebate and specialist recognition for some of the skills that rural generalists do. So watch this space, but it's very exciting.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think what's amazing is, you look at, we've got current rural generalists working in Australia, like Graham and the current Rural Health Commissioner, Ruth Stewart, who had to go overseas to do parts of their training. And now in their lifetime, we've got to a point where Australia is actually a world leader in this subspecialty. And yeah, we're really looked to by a lot of other countries in the world to how we do this training and how our rural generalists actually work.
Perfect, thank you. So it sounds like what we've got here is a pretty special program. Are there any other programs like this in any other states?
Absolutely. So this is part of a national program that's being rolled out to line up with the recognition of rural generalism as a subspecialty. So there are programs in each state that are being set up. Queensland has had a very robust rural generalist training program for a long time. The other states are really doing something very similar.
Perfect, thank you. And this is the last question, which is where can we find out more information? So if anyone's watching the video, the QR code behind Angela's head links to the website. But for people who are listening on the podcast, where can we go to find more information for people who are interested?
So we have a website which is vicruralgeneralist.com.au. We're also on Twitter and on Facebook.
Does anyone have anything they'd like to add or any advice they'd like to give to students who are coming through or anything like that before we finish?
I mean, I think just, the website's got a lot of information about how the program works in a very practically written way. So it's written for students and junior doctors so that they can understand exactly what's involved in the training. And if anybody has specific questions, we have an email address which is vrgp@pmcv.com.au, and that will go through to me, and I can either answer any questions that you have or direct you to other people in the program who are better suited to that question.
If you're in your earlier stages of your medical training, I can just encourage you to get out there and do a rural placement and be amongst rural generalists and see the amazing work that is going on out there in Australian rural communities, because the skill set is incredible, it's inspirational, and until you really get out there and see it and appreciate it, if you're not sure, then you can see whether it's for you, and then hopefully we'll see you in one of our community intern programs.
Thank you very much. I do have another question. So with the community internship programs, because I know being a final year this year, there was a lot of uncertainty, I guess, among our cohort about what they entail. Are you able to describe those a bit just for people who might be looking to apply next year, if that's okay?
All rural community intern training places in Victoria involve a mixture of community GP rotations as well as hospital rotations. So that's the beauty of the community intern program. So you'll do 3 rotations in your base, not necessarily a base hospital, but home hospital, and they'll be your core rotations of emergency, general medicine and general surgery. And then you will do 2 rotations, so roughly about 20 weeks in a community general practice setting where the majority they essentially are rural generalists, so they will be connected to a small rural hospital, and you'll often do ward rounds and do those sorts of things as well. So that's the beauty of the program. It's actually, although you have an affiliated hospital, you will be connected to the community for 2 out of 5 of the rotations.
The Rural Community Intern Program has existed in Victoria, as most people know, for many years now, but not connected to rural generalist training. So some of those trainees who went through Rural Community Intern programs went on to train in other specialties, went back to Metro, and some of them did continue on to rural generalist training. Now, with the VRGP being set up, those rural community intern programs are being incorporated into VRGP. So the idea is that they will become the first year of the VRGP pathway. But at the moment, we're still in a little bit of a transition because the program has to kind of ease in. This is a massive change program. So as with any change program, it takes a while to kind of smooth things out, and it's better to do that through a transition rather than a straight jump from one thing to another.
Thank you very much for explaining that. So I guess if no one else has any questions, that will be about it. Thank you all very much for coming tonight and for agreeing to talk to us and to be part of this episode. So I guess if anyone has anything they'd like to add, otherwise we'll leave it here and you can all have a wonderful night. And Louise, sorry, get back to your patients and what you've still got to do.
Yeah.
Caitlin.
Thanks, Caitlin.
Thank you.
Thanks, guys.
Everyone.
And thanks,
Good night.
Caitlin. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you very much.
Bye.
See you later.
So much.